Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jackie Sprague, and I'm the Vice President of the Federation of Vermont Lakes and Ponds. Welcome to a look into Vermont public greeter programs. We really appreciate your interest and support in these short online offerings. Thank you to the Events Committee and the Ad Hoc AS group for initiating these one-hour webinars. Jack.
Okay, you want me to jump in or you want to continue?
Go ahead, Jack.
Okay. So just let me, I'm Jack Widness. I'm the chair of the committee along with the events committee that's put this together. It's an ad hoc AIS water quality committee. And we welcome you to our noon seminar. Today is What It All Means, a look into Vermont's public access greeter program. And I think this is really timely. As you know, we've been gathering data electronically the last few years. So we're going to be hearing about this from Olin Reed, who's the aquatic biologist for the AIS program at the DEC. And I don't know if everyone has met Olin, but this is a good opportunity to do so. He's taken over recently this task, and he was just telling us he's given the first of the greeter access programs to get people ready, and he's going to add to our chat a link to other sessions that people can have. For those of you that don't know Olin, he's from Hyde Park, Vermont, and he holds a BA in environmental studies from Regis University in Denver, where he was studying 2,000-year-old stand of bristlecone pines. I'm not sure I'd know one if I saw one, but it sounds really interesting. And terrestrial invasives, so the new and the old. So Olin began his conservation work as an attendant at Elmore State Park, which I just visited this year, and it's a beautiful, beautiful place. It really is, and there's that huge mountain in the background, which I love. So if you haven't been there, you really should. And he's focused his efforts on the DEC and the public greeter program, as I just mentioned. And he's now a full-time employee of the DEC and continues his efforts of overseeing the greeter program, as well as also taking over the state's aquatic nuisance control permitting. So I think we're going to have a really good learning experience too for all of you. And let's get started. So Olin, welcome. We look forward to the knowledge you're going to impart and the fun we're going to have today. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thanks, Jack. And thank you, Bob, for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Should work. Right. You guys can see that? Yep, perfect. Great. All right. So yeah, like Jack said, I just started as a full-time employee here in January, but I oversaw, or I guess assisted with overseeing the program as a technician last summer. And so I've been with the program about a year now, which is kind of crazy to think about. But I was really lucky to jump in as a full-time employee, and I'm going to be taking over the public access greeter program from Kimberly Jensen, who I'm sure you're all familiar with. That way she has one less thing on her plate. So today's presentation, I'm really going to dive into some data. There's going to be a lot of numbers, a lot of graphs. I promise there's no test on this at the end. It's just to kind of give you an idea as to what I look at whenever I'm looking at these, what I looked at last summer or last fall, whenever I was looking at kind of the end of year review. So I'm going to do just a quick kind of overview of what aquatic invasive species are, how they got here, what they're doing here, and then we'll really dive into the public greeter program. So you can see here in the bottom left, we're pulling some water chestnut out of the water. That's the state's one management project, and I'll dive into that a bit more. But that's our long-term management project that we've been dealing with since the 70s, I believe, way before my time. We've got some zebra mussels and some Eurasian water milfoil here as too, some of our more notorious invasive species.
One thing I just want to interrupt just for a second, I forgot to mention. So if you have questions, we'd like to hold them till the end, but please put them in the chat, unless it's some sort of an emergency that you just have to have an answer to. And Martha Winston, who'll be looking at that, will let us know. But again, please put your questions in the chat. We can also have you chime in and raise your hand later on, but that would really help us. Sorry to interrupt.
No, totally fine. Yeah, just please. I'm gonna go over some questions here at the end that I was asked beforehand, but I'm here to answer questions and to give you guys a better insight into what the program is. So yeah, a little bit of a difference here. The difference between non-native, nuisance, and invasive. So non-native plants, we have quite a few non-native plants. We don't necessarily list them as invasive though, unless they're a nuisance. And those nuisance plants sometimes are native plants. They're really annoying. I know my grandmother has a huge garden and she pulls a lot of native weeds out of her garden. But where the term invasive comes in is whenever you combine those two, when they're both non-native and when they're nuisance plants. And so Japanese knotweed's a big terrestrial one that I'm sure you're all aware of. I've been seeing a lot of signs from our terrestrial partners who are dealing with Japanese knotweed around the state. Like I said, we've got zebra mussels. That's the big one, the big concern that we deal with, especially with our partners in the Great Lakes. Emerald ash borer and Hemlock woolly adelgid are two newer ones to the state. Like Jack said in the introduction, I started off in terrestrials. I was, like you said, I was working on trees, and so I did a lot with dendrochronology. That's what that 2,000-year-old stand was. So I was really looking at climate history and pest history and stressors on an ancient stand of trees, and then I tied into that some terrestrial invasive ecology. And so I was looking at emerald ash borers and Hemlock woolly adelgid and some of our terrestrial grasses that we deal with in the genus Brome or Bromus. And so we have a lot of invasive terrestrial plants as well, and those are things that we're worried about. Then we obviously have Eurasian water milfoil. That's the big one. We're now at 102 lakes this year that have Eurasian water milfoil. It's pretty widespread. And so some of the pathways that we deal with, luckily in Vermont, we don't have a lot of ballast water discharge that we have to deal with. No big boats are coming in from Europe or Asia or South America. But we are connected through canals and waterways to the Great Lakes. And so, you know, what the Great Lakes get whenever they get a big boat in, you know, we eventually get. And that's likely how zebra mussels came over. That's likely how round goby came over and is on its way. Home gardening, that's another big one. Purple loosestrife, beautiful plant, very invasive, and it causes a lot of problems. And so we've definitely seen our fair share of home gardening and illegal stocking of plants and animals for personal use. Aquarium dumping is another big one. That's something I'm intimately aware of right now. We're working with all of our aquarium partners right now as we deal on a federal level with some, I guess you could call them dirty suppliers who are accidentally introducing invasive species in some of their shipments to pet stores. And so we're working with all of our statewide pet stores to figure out what's going on and how to make sure that those invasive species aren't getting out into the wild. And then what I'm really going to talk to you all about today is overland transport. That's the one that the greeters are here to stop. That's one of our biggest ones within the state. And so that's something that we're all here to learn about and to make sure isn't happening. Like I said, overland transport's a big issue. A lot of our boat launches and lakes have various invasive species. Like I said, Eurasian water milfoil is at 102 now, and I'll go over that a bit more. But I can't tell you how many times I've pulled both invasive plants like Eurasian water milfoil and curly-leaf pondweed or brittle naiad off of the boat just in the past year. We also pull a lot of native plants off, but just as a reminder, it is illegal to transport any aquatic plants in the state. And so that's something we want to make sure isn't happening. And so just a little introduction to what the greeter program is. You know, we're really here to spread or to prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species. We really want to have a well-trained group of greeters. Like Jack said, I'll provide a link to our greeter website that has the training dates and the registration link. We just had our first one. It was a returning greeter training. And so that was just for returning greeters and coordinators who are all, many of who have been doing this a lot longer than I have. And so that was a great opportunity and things go really well. And note that word network is there. You know, these programs are not, you know, little islands here and there. They're all connected and they're all kind of helping each other out. That's something that we're really working on making sure is, you know, we're not just working on our own lakes, we're working on all of the lakes. And then we want to educate recreational boaters about invasive species. We really want people to get involved with the program. Aquatic invasive species cause a lot of damage, and they cause a lot of harm, and they're very scary. And we want our just layperson to be aware of them. We really want people to know what's going on and how they can help. And then we want to provide inspections and decontaminations to boaters. We want to make sure that they're doing the right thing. Something that we see with a lot of our partners is that they charge for boat launches, that they charge for inspections, that they charge for decontaminations. That's something that the DEC has no interest in implementing. We don't want boaters to see a greeter and drive to the next body of water. We want them to make this, or we want them to be aware that this is a painless process, that it's quick, it's easy. We try to make our inspections less than 5 minutes long and just happen while the boater's getting ready. So we really encourage our greeters to make this as easy as possible for the boaters. And again, if we get those boaters, involved in doing this on their own, it makes those inspections even quicker. If we have somebody that's already done their boat, we can usually do an inspection in under a minute. It's a quick overview, it's easy. And so that's something we really want to make sure is happening. And then obviously the purpose of the program, I did not include the invasion curve graph. I'm sure you've all seen it 1,000 times at this point. But we want to stop new invasions. Prevention is the cheapest and easiest method of invasive species management. Once you have a new invasion, things start to get exponentially more difficult and more expensive. And so that's something we want to avoid. And so I'm just going to do a quick overview of the history of the program. Our earliest records date back to 1882-ish. It's a rough record. That was a really long time ago. And that was faucet snails showing up in Vermont. I'm pretty sure it was Lake Champlain, but don't quote me on that. So faucet snails have been around for a really long time. We also had a record of Brazilian waterweed in 1913, Aguirre-Denza. It's the only record of Brazilian waterweed in the state. We don't know what body of water it was. We don't have any more information of that, and we haven't seen it since. So we're assuming it's gone at this point. We've surveyed for it pretty extensively. And then curly-leaf pondweed shows up in Champlain in 29. Again, that was kind of the first big invasion that we had. Water chestnut shows up in the 40s, and that's something I'll touch on a bit more. But yeah, we've been managing water chestnut for a long time now. And then in 1962 is where things kind of start to go downhill. We get banded mystery snail in Bombazine, and Eurasian water milfoil shows up in Champlain. And then, yeah, that occurs in 1962, and it stays in Champlain for 20 years, which is great. And it kind of shows how that's starting to exponentially spread. So yeah, you can see in 1982, Eurasian water milfoil spreads to Bombazine. And so that was the first movement of Eurasian water milfoil that we're aware of in the state. And so, like I said, we saw there was a 20-year gap there where Eurasian water milfoil stayed put. And now, as we get further along here, we have a lot. Eurasian water milfoil is our most widespread invasive. Brittle naiad starts to pop up in 1984. There's only a few lakes with brittle naiad here, so it hasn't really spread much. And that's the same year that white perch shows up in Champlain. Carps a few years later, and your European rudd follows. Where things really start to get interesting is when zebra mussels show up in Champlain. That's whenever things start to get hairy, and on the federal level and on the state level, we really start to look at the impacts and the long-term impacts of zebra mussels and aquatic invasive species in general. And that same year, European frogbit shows up, and a few years later, we have rusty crawfish and alewife. Zebra mussel stays put. I like to think that it stays put until I was born. I was born in '98. I'm a young one, and that's when it spreads to Bombazine. And then we have tench show up in Champlain in 2002, and that's the same year that the greeter program begins. So that was our first greeter program, or statewide or state regulated greeter program in 2002. And you can see things kind of have slowed down a bit since then. We had variable leaf milfoil on Halls Lake. It's since been removed, and big water crayfish a few years later. Starry stonewort shows up in Memphremagog in 2015, and Asian clam shortly after. Like I said, 20 years from Champlain to Bombazine with Eurasian water milfoil, and then just 40 years later, we have 100 lakes that are now infested with Eurasian water milfoil. So it really kind of picked up once it got going. And like I said, a bit more about the history of the program. We are provided authority through statute. It's 10 VSA 1461. You guys are more than welcome to check out our website and read through our statute. I just want to note here that we aren't law enforcement and we don't have law enforcement authority, but we do have the ability to make sure that boats are inspected and decontaminated if necessary. And if a boater decides to ignore statute, then we contact the appropriate law enforcement authority. A picture in the bottom right, again, a little history of the program. We had a boat fall off, nothing too crazy. That boat currently has a hole in it though. But that was before my time, so I can't be blamed for that. All right, and a bit more about the history. So like I said, water chestnut showed up in the 40s. I was reading through in preparation for this some notes from the 70s, and they were hand pulling water chestnut. Just in the early 70s, they were hand pulling it in southern Lake Champlain. It wasn't really a big deal. I think in 1976 or something, they pulled like 37 plants out of the lake, and that was it, which is crazy. Today, we spend $500,000 a year managing water chestnut. When ignored in the 80s, we kind of thought we had gotten rid of it. And then we discovered that, the seeds can stay dormant in the sediment for 14, 15 years, and they pop back up. And that's exactly what happened. In the 90s, we realized we had made a mistake and that had gotten a lot worse. And so you can see there on the left, that's a mechanical harvester that's harvesting for water chestnut. We have quite a few of those on the lake, mostly in the southern bays. And then that top bay, or that top picture is a picture of Mill Bay. It's in New York, but we manage all of Lake Champlain, so we are technically responsible for this. But this picture I took last summer, I had never really seen the impacts of what water chestnut does until I climbed over some railroad tracks into this tiny little bay that I couldn't really make out from the open lake. And this is what I was greeted with. All of the green you see in that water is water chestnut. It's a huge mat, and you can see that the landowners to the right, there's a house up there to the right, they've kind of had to create their own little path in the water. So that's kind of the threat of water chestnut. That bottom photo is from 1980 or so, somewhere in the early 1980s, and that's just a mat of water chestnut. So you can see the issues it has and why we manage it. So kind of a status of the public access greeter program. We currently operate on 30 bodies of water. That doesn't include Lake Champlain or any programs that are funded through the Lake Champlain Basin program. This is just within the Vermont Public Access Greeter program. They're kind of two separate things going on, although we work very, very closely. And so we cover at the moment 33 boat launches. We're hoping to add 1 to 3 more bodies of water this year. I believe South Pond and Marlborough is hoping to add something. Averill Lake is hoping to have a volunteer program, and we're also working with Arrowhead Mountain Lake to get a program started. And so this is how we collect our data. We use Survey 123. If you're involved with the greeter program, or if you went to Allison's FOBLOP seminar a few weeks ago, she also uses Survey 123. That's how we gather our data. This used to be on sheets of paper, and according to Kim, it took 3 months for 3 people full-time just uploading the data. I'm really glad I don't have to do that. It's really great to be able to see what's happening instantly across the state. And we do a lot of different things with the data, and that's what we're going to get into here. This is one of our vector maps that we created a few years ago. I'm working on creating a new one. We do lots of fun things like that with our data. And all of our data is accessible through our dashboard, and there are some questions about that I'll get to as well. But our dashboards is currently only accessible from people who have our username and password for the greeter data. And it shows you, this is just the past 2 years data since we've been doing this, and it shows you how many people have been greeted, the inspections done, the decontamination's done. It shows you our watercraft type. There's an emergency list there in the center, and then that's also an export table where our partners can they can download the data for their individual program and use it however they see fit. There's a great map there in the top right corner, and then there are a few graphs there in the bottom right that show trip purpose, the familiarity with AIS, and whether or not the boater is going to check for aquatic invasive species in the future. So this is where we're going to start getting into the nitty gritty. These are our aquatic invasive species efforts over the years. Again, we started in 2002, and you can see as the number of boats inspected goes up, so does the number of intercepts. That makes sense. It's pretty logical. But you can kind of see this past year, we had a huge spike in intercepts compared to the number of boats that were greeted. And that's something we'll start to get into in a bit. But I think this graph really shows that our efforts are not, none. We are doing a great job, and we're actually making a difference. Each one of these intercepts is a potential new invasion. And so that's something that we're very proud of, that we stopped nearly 1,500 new invasions this past year, which is great. And so these are some of the maps that we create with the data. So here on the left is the number of inspections done that had organisms on it. And so you can see kind of that hotspot down in the southwest or central southwest area down near Bombazine and St. Catherine. But a lot of the inspections they were doing, they had organisms coming off the boats. And whether those were retrievals or launches, is something else. But it's great to see that our program down in the Southwest are doing their job, and they're really catching a lot of things that could be spread. Same idea with the map on the right. That's just the number of inspections with aquatic invasive species on them rather than just organisms in general. So, we differentiate there that, they could be a terrestrial plant, they could be a native plant. And so this is just the number of inspections with aquatic invasive species on the right. And you can see again, Bombazine had a huge number, and it throws off the rest of the map. It makes everything else kind of pale in comparison. St. Catherine had quite a few, and then some of our lakes on the eastern corridor also had quite a few catches of aquatic invasive species. Oh, and with this, we start to tie into this map here. And so this graph just shows the number of boats with organisms from bodies of water. So this just shows that if Seymour, or this just shows from all the other lakes, whenever they're gathering data regarding where the boater was last, if they had an organism on the body of water, this is where they were coming from. So St. Catherine was our biggest vector. So a lot of reader programs throughout the state were catching boats coming from St. Catherine with some sort of organism, whether they're aquatic invasive species or whether they're some other organism. And you can see Bombazine was the other big one, and that kind of lines up with those maps that we showed you on the left, that Bombazine and St. Catherine are catching. They're catching a lot as well, but obviously we're missing a lot that are coming out of those bodies of water. And so this is a really great graph, considering that Bombazine and St. Catherine are two fairly invaded bodies of water that we're really kind of monitoring to make sure it don't spread elsewhere. Just with this, I only included the top 30 bodies of water, but we did have one boat that had an organism come all the way from South America. I have no idea what that organism was. The greeter did not provide any other information other than the fact that they cleaned off a boat from South America. And with this, we generally say that outboard motors and such are our biggest concerns. But here you can see along our x-axis that Green River Reservoir is down there. That's within our top 30. Green River Reservoir is I think they have it's a state park, and you can't have anything over 5 horsepower, and it has to be electric if you do. And so it's not, those were all likely kayaks or canoes or something. And so it is important to see that we do have boats such as non-outboard motor type boats that do have organisms on them. It's really big. And so this just kind of talks about our watercraft direction. And this is a really important graph because, again, like I mentioned earlier, all of these programs are not in a bubble. We're working as a state to work together on protecting all of our lakes and ponds. But what this graph shows is that most of the greeters are doing launch inspections. They're not doing retrievals. So that means that a lot of our programs are missing boats on retrieval, so as they leave the lake, and as we saw, a lot of boats are being caught on retrieval with invasive species. And this is where this kind of graph really starts to sum this up. Like I said, you can see that we have this gap here where we weren't collecting that data, but I'm really glad we've started again, where we have a larger number of watercraft with organisms being removed on retrieval rather than on launching. And so this shows that we kind of have a gap here. And this is how we use this data to really try to support our programs to have longer hours, to have more manpower out there, because we really want to stop all of those potential, boaters leaving with some sort of organism, whether it's native or invasive. And again, this is kind of where we talk about the percent of watercraft carrying plant or animal material, and that's kind of we had this dip there in the late 2010s, and now it's kind of climbing back up, and we had this huge spike this last year. We had nearly 5% of boats that were inspected this year carrying some sort of plant or animal material, and so that's something where we're saying, okay, this problem isn't getting better, it's getting worse, and we really want to support our programs to have longer hours, to have more people out there so that they can stop these plants and animals from being introduced. And so this is just the number of invasive species. So this is just a really good breakdown of what it's like. 91% of AIS interceptions this year were Eurasian water milfoil. Makes sense. It's our most widespread invasive. And then we bumped down to 41 were curly-leaf pondweed. Some of those might have been misidentified by the greeters, but curly-leaf pondweed is one of our more proliferate invasive species. I think we have 37 bodies of water currently invaded by curly-leaf pondweed, so that's definitely something we're on the lookout for. Variable leaf milfoil, this one might have been mis-ID'd sometimes for Eurasian water milfoil. But we did have quite a few samples of variable leaf milfoil coming from out of state. Variable leaf milfoil is not as big of a problem in Vermont as it is in other states, but Champlain does have quite a bit of variable leaf milfoil. And so that's just something that we're keeping an eye on. We did have quite a few zebra mussel interceptions this year. They're all coming out of Bombazine, Champlain, or Memphremagog. As many of you are aware, in 2018, Memphremagog was found to have zebra mussels up on the northern portion. They haven't quite crossed the border. Maybe they stopped when we all implemented our border restrictions during COVID, but they're making their way down here, and I'm sure it's only a matter of time. And then from there, we had some brittle naiad, we had a hydrilla and starstone wort catch, we had a rusty crawfish, we had a really good water chestnut catch down in, I believe it was either Somerset or Harriman. But they caught a viable seed that was a really great catch, because that would have become a problem. And then we had one Brazilian Alodia catch from down south. And so this is just a different way to view this data. And so you can see most of our boats don't carry anything, which is great. We're only at 5% of our boats being greeted that have organisms on them. And you can kind of see how that starts to break down once you get a little further. And then this is a graph that we really like to focus on. So this is the boaters' familiarity with aquatic invasive species. Just whether or not they're aware of them. They don't necessarily need to be able to ID them or anything, but we just want to know if they know what aquatic invasive species are. So we're sitting somewhere around the 98% for the past 2 years. And this is a number that we just surpass all other states in. When we work with our partners, they are closer to the 50% of people are aware of aquatic invasive species. So the fact that we're at 98% is great. And I think we can attribute that to you guys do a ton of great work. And so this is something that we're really happy about. And so how can we get those 2%? This is something that we want to focus on. Well, we can provide signage. That's something that we all do. I also am in charge of all the signs and whatnot throughout the state. I do a lot of educational material stuff. So the sign on the right is a sign that we should have. We're going to getting more printed, but we have them at every single boat launch throughout the state. That's the dream anyways. That that sign in the top left or the top center there is one of our older signs, and we have quite a few of those throughout the state. And then we have alerts and posters that go up all over the place in state parks and marinas and everything, like this Asian clam one and this clean drain dry sign. And so the other question that's asked is how will boaters check for aquatic invasive species in the future? I didn't do percentages with this because I really just want to point out that only 171 people out of the 31,000 that were greeted this year were not willing to check for aquatic invasive species. That's a huge number that are willing to check for aquatic invasive species. That's great. That's what we want to see. But I really hate seeing 171 people saying no. And so that's something that we want to attack. We want to say, okay, how do we get those people involved? How do we get them to check for aquatic invasive species in the future? Well, what we want to do is we want to, figure out how it's impacting them and get them involved, and so that they can see it. So one of the things that we look at here is hydrilla supporting a cyanobacteria that's killing eagles. And so people love eagles. Eagles are cool. They're our national bird. And we don't want our eagles dying. And Vermont's done a really good job of increasing our eagle populations. I saw 4 eagles one day last year on the Connecticut River. And it was crazy to see because I'd never seen that many eagles at one point. And so this is something that we make people aware of. And this is something we want our breeders to spread. That, hey, invasive species, they pose a threat to not just things in the water, but things elsewhere. And then we also get people involved just by explaining to them, what it means to have an invasive species. I'll point out, my aunt doesn't really understand what I do, but when I tell her that I work with milfoil, oh, she knows what milfoil is. That's good. She hates it when she goes swimming at Elmore or Carmi and there's Eurasian water milfoil in the swimming area and it touches her feet. She hates that. And so now she's aware of it and she's working on not, she's spreading the word. Whenever she goes to a new lake, she makes sure that her boat doesn't have any milfoil on it, which is what we want to see. And that's how we get people involved in it. We make sure that people understand that we lose native species like our mussels with, when we have a new zebra mussel invasion. And we want anglers to be aware of the fact that, an invasive species, can really disrupt and harm native fish habitats. And so we want our anglers to be aware of invasive species. And in the bottom left, you can see, it was a picture I took last year on Silver Lake in Leicester. And that's just a mat of Eurasian water milfoil in the water. I felt like I could almost walk out and just kind of walk along it. It was incredible. I've never seen anything quite like it. And so, making sure that our boaters are aware that, you can't really navigate in a body of water whenever it's a dense bed of milfoil. And then again, looking at, that's an alewife die-off in the bottom right. And so looking at how that can harm and all of the issues that can cause with nutrient loading in the lake. And the other big thing that I talked about earlier with water chestnut is the commercial impacts it has. It impacts navigation. The reason that we spend $500,000 a year every year to manage water chestnut is because it will take over the Lake Champlain. And so we really want to make sure that you can boat on Lake Champlain. And so that's why we manage it. And so I kind of talked about this already. This is that data where we're looking at how we're really catching mostly boats being launched rather than being retrieved. And so these are some of our new invasions this past year. I just wanted to kind of touch base on what these were. So in 2021, we had our 100th body of water that was invaded by Eurasian water milfoil. Last year, we had 3 new ones. So the 2 pictures there on the left, those are from Half Moon Pond down in Hubbardton. That's Half Moon Pond State Park. That's a pretty healthy Eurasian water milfoil, which was pretty sad to see. On the top right, that's that picture I showed earlier of Silver Lake and Leicester. That lake is part of I think it's a part of the National Forest. It sits above Dunmore and Fern. And so it's right above them and it's feeding those lakes. And they have a pretty healthy invasion. And I honestly don't know how Eurasian water milfoil got out there. It probably got out there by a kayak because I carried a kayak a mile through the woods to get to this lake. And so it was a pain to get there and it was a pain to get out. And so somebody must have had some milfoil on their lake or on their boat. And the bottom right, that's some of our technicians last year who were doing EDRR over at Lake Eden, who we found some milfoil in Lake Eden. That was our 103rd body of water that had invasive or that had EWM. And so we were working on managing that population and trying to eradicate it before it became lake-wide. With that, like I said, we've had 3 new ones, but earlier I mentioned that we only have 102 lakes that have Eurasian water milfoil. We removed Shadow Lake this past year from our infested water bodies list. So congrats, Shadow. You are the only lake that has successfully eradicated the massive population of EWM that you had. And so that's something we're really proud of the work that they've done. And we'll be going there and monitoring in the future. Maybe it'll get added back. We hope it doesn't. But it was great to see that they've done that. One of the other new invasions this year was water chestnut in Arrowhead Mountain Lake. This was really sad to see. You can see that on the left there, that was kind of the area in which that in that purple, that was the area in which that we found a water chestnut. And it was only 3 or 4 plants, but the seeds had already dropped. So water chestnut's now added to our long-term management. And so this is something that we realize is kind of a gap. You can see on the map on the right, those red dots are areas where water chestnut is in Lake Champlain. Arrowhead Mountain Lake's very, very close to Lake Champlain, and these likely came from boats that had left those areas. Arrowhead Mountain Lake does not have a greeter program. And so this is something that we want to look at in the future, is working with our partners, the natural resource conservation districts there and the local municipalities, and getting a greeter program there. We were a little too late for the water chestnut, but we hope that we can keep other things out that are in Champlain currently. And so right now we have 170 different types of aquatic and wetland plants in the state. I think this number is actually 171 now. We found a species that we hadn't recorded last year. We're not actually sure if it's invasive or if it's just a native that's pretty rare. We found a Lombo lateo down in Brattleboro. And so now I want to talk about Champlain as a source. So 28 of our 30 bodies of water indicated that Champlain was the last body of water that those boats had visited. And you can see there on the left that some of our zebra mussel, potential zebra mussel invasions were coming from Champlain. They showed up at Memph, Seymour, and Willoughby, and they all had great catches of stopping zebra mussels from entering the body of water. Lake Champlain currently has 51 different aquatic invasive species, which is a huge number. It's by far our biggest vector, and we work very closely with the Lake Champlain Basin Program to keep that at bay. They have a great network of greeters on the lake that do a really great job of deconning boats before they leave. The only new invasive species that Champlain has had in the past 10 years, like I said, we kind of had that big hit there in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, but the only invasive species that they've had introduced recently was spiny and fisher water flea. So that's a big issue that we're dealing with, but it's also great to see that things have slowed down a bit for the lake. And with this, again, we're looking at, okay, Champlain is a source. We cover 30 bodies of water right now. I visited 247 boat launches. I missed 30 or so that we didn't have on our list. That's a lot of boat launches that aren't protected by greeters. And so this is something that we want to work on. If any of these boat launches have something from Champlain, and if the greeters on Champlain missed something, or if they came from another station that a greeter wasn't at, and they go to one of these unprotected bodies of water, well, that's a huge issue. And that's really why we want to work with the public and getting people knowledgeable about what aquatic invasive species are. So again, Champlain's a huge source. Again, we have some great partners over at the Lake Champlain Basin Program that do a really good job of making sure that boats are inspected and decontaminated before they leave. The Connecticut River is another gap that we have. We've been working for years trying to get some greeters on the Connecticut River, and we haven't been very successful. The Connecticut River has a huge population of various invasive species. They have rusty crawfish, they have brittle naiad, they have curly pondweed, they have Chinese mystery snail, and they're in the top. They have hydrilla. It's not in Vermont yet. It's barely in Massachusetts. It's really just in Connecticut at the moment, but it is in the Connecticut River, and it's making its way up north. And you can see there on the right, those are just some of the boat launches in the southern, central to southern region of the Connecticut. Some of them are in New Hampshire, some of them are in Vermont. But those smaller dots along there are areas where I spent my fall surveying for hydrilla to make sure it's not there. And so getting some greeters on the Connecticut River would be huge for us in making sure. This past year, we had 21 boats that went to our programs that came from the Connecticut River. And bombazine is another huge vector. So you can see that they greeted 1,800 boats last year. That's a lot. luckily for us, Bombazine kind of stays, they kind of stay to themselves. They don't really, the boats don't really move elsewhere throughout the state. Only 83 instances were from, or only 83 boats reported that Bombazine was the last body of water that they visited. But what this does show is, and if we think back to that map that we looked at earlier with our decons happening, Bombazine's pulling a lot of organisms out of the body of water, and that's something that we want to make sure that our programs in that area are aware of, and that's something that all of those unprotected lakes in that region are aware of, because we don't want new invasions spreading around there. The same idea with Memphremagog. They have kind of a smaller program, and it's something we're working on getting built up. But like I said, they had 300 boats greeted last year, and they inspected all of them, which was great. And 189 boaters indicated that Memphremagog was the last body of water that they visited. So if we go back to here, we're 83, we're saying that Bombazine was the last one, but Memphremagog is saying 189. Well, that kind of shows a gap that maybe we don't have enough programs down in the region that boaters from Bombazine are going to on a regular basis. So that's something we're working on as a program to indicate where those high risk bodies of water are, and where we should really push for a new program. And there I kind of also want to point out here in this Memphremagog slide, that graph in the bottom right hand corner, that's are the boaters familiar with aquatic invasive species. As a state, we're sitting at around 98%. But boaters that are going to Memphremagog are only sitting around 89%. That's a 9% difference, and that's something we really want to work on. So right now we're working on with the MWA and with our partners in Newport, and working on getting the public involved with this whole aquatic invasive species ordeal, and making sure they understand the impacts and what it means to have an invasive species. And so let's talk a little bit about the future of the state. Things have, like I said, things have been getting worse. We've had a lot of new invasive species. Climate change isn't helping at all. That's allowing these populations to move further and further north, and that's a huge risk to us as a state. And so this is something that we're very aware of, and we're constantly on the lookout for what the next invader could be. And we really want to work with our greeters and training them on how to identify those new invasions. We work a lot right now with the Lake Champlain Basin program on working on getting an action plan in place for around Goby. It's on its way, and that could have a detrimental impact to our native fish populations. And so, these are things that we're really keeping an eye on. And so again, this is another little map that shows the 2022 stations. So these are all of the lakes that we had covered last year. And that was great. But on the right there, you can see that's the aquatic invasive species density. So this just takes into account how many invasive species and where they are. So you can see that southwest portion near Bombazine, St. Catherine, Dunmore, there's a lot of invasive species in that region, and we don't have very many greeter programs down there. And that's something we really, really want to do. But what's great is up there in the Northeast Kingdom, we have a ton of programs, which is awesome to see, and they're catching a lot of invasive species, and they're doing a good job. This map shows us that, hey, our programs are working. They're keeping invasive species out of these lakes so they don't have to deal with it. And again, our programs are a network. We're working together as a state to protect each other from invasive species. Just because Bombazine has zebra mussels, that doesn't mean we want it to go anywhere else. We want it to stay in Bombazine. And so the more that Bombazine can do to protect other lakes from zebra mussels is great. And a bit more about the future of the state. This is just kind of my long-term thoughts on it. I've been going through a lot of trainings with our Western partners. I went to college out in Colorado, and we've been working with our partners around the country. And some lakes out west see, as many boats as our entire state does in a year. We are a very rural state, and we're not very heavily populated. And so, the programs in the West want us to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars on these great new ideas and these decon stations, and that's great. And if we could be the most high-tech state in the country, that'd be great. But what I recognize that what they're doing is not necessarily plug and play for us. And so we kind of have to work with them to understand what's going on and best management practices, but we also kind of have to pave our own path because we are a very unique state in that we're so rural and we're so kind of out there. This is Lower Sims Pond over kind of east of Montpelier. I'm going to forget the town it's in. I went to a lot of them last year. But I drove like 10 minutes down a dirt road and there were no other people or cars or anything. I thought I was going to get stuck a couple times. And this is just a lake out in the middle of nowhere. And it was beautiful. It was stunning. Most states don't have this. And so this is something we really want to protect. We really want to make sure that again, we're getting the public involved. We're getting these things involved to make sure that we can protect our areas like this. So yeah. That's kind of the end of my presentation. I had some questions that were given to me ahead of time that I wanted to answer really quickly. I know I'm kind of running short on time, so I'll try to get through these as quickly as possible. So can the AIS Greeter database be made public? Not really the way that it's set up now, but what we do want to do as a program is provide a public-facing data set. And so it'll be similar to our database. A lot of our partners, I've been looking a lot at like Virginia has a really great website that has some great maps and graphs. And so I want to work with our partners there. We also work a lot with like, the USGS and we have some people down at University of Georgia that have some really great information and ways to go about this. And so we're going to be working with them to create a more comprehensive website. And so what are the best ways to work with data on all devices? I really just use Excel. We're working on starting to code a bit more with R and the like. I've been really utilizing Esri, so I use ArcGIS. But you don't have to have all of those things to make this work. There are open source free software like LibreOffice or Google Sheets that can do this. The same thing that I'm doing right now. There are open source versions of GIS software like QGIS or Google Earth that are all available to you and that will all work with our data. We aren't trying to make our data proprietary or anything like that. We want people to be able to use it and to see what's going on. And for this, we really recommend that lake associations and municipalities work with us on how to create these informative summary data reports. We want them to really dig into the data, kind of like I did today, and see what the risk is and what they're missing, really seeing where the gaps might be for their lake. When do we clean it up? That's a great question. This is my first time doing this as a full-time employee. I'm hoping to get it done sooner rather than later. Last year, it took me until about November to really kind of sort through the data. And then my technician season ended, so I left for a month. And then I started back up in January. So there's a weird gap there. And so hoping now that I'm full-time and I'm doing this all the time that I can clean this up a little bit earlier. These interconnectivity maps, like I said, I'm working with Kim right now to kind of figure out how to best implement these. We have some different ways that we want to do it than we have in the past. The interconnectivity maps are not currently on our website. Whenever I do publish a new one, I will have it out there and I'll let you guys know so you can see them. We do have maps that are hosted on our website. They're a bit older. They haven't been updated in a few years. They were hosted by technicians. Those technicians' accounts have since been deleted, but the maps are still there. So I can't actually change the maps. So I'm working on creating, again, these new maps that we can all look at. What are some of the implications to identify high-risk lakes that boats encountered are coming from? So this is something that we really want boaters or greeters to be aware of, is what these risks are. And so we provide our greeters with an infested water bodies list so that they can look at a list and be, okay, this lake has water chestnut, this lake has Eurasian water milfoil. These are things that I know how to identify, and that they can dig through and really be on the lookout for. And so that's kind of how we deal with that. Any plans to develop better decon protocols and greeter stations with washing capabilities? Is it a funding problem? Yes, we do have plans to develop better decon protocols. We're putting a decon station at Memphis-Magog this year. As you saw, we have a ton of invasives coming out of Bombazine. We don't currently have a decon station there. We're trying to get one put there, and we want to have one. But again, it's a funding problem. We've worked very hard with FOBLOP and our other partners to have funding available, but we are limited in what we can do as a program. We don't actually, hire greeters or anything. These are all, hired through our partners, our local municipalities and groups. So it's something that we're very aware of, and we're doing our best right now to figure out what the most cost-effective way to implement these sorts of things are. How do we see the programs evolving and data being gathered to make the programs more effective, efficient, less costly? Again, these are things that I'm very aware of, and I really want to focus on. Again, we're a very rural state and our funding's pretty limited. Some of our programs are volunteer only, and that's okay, and that's great. I want there to be something rather than nothing. If they catch one plant, I am going to be so excited for them, because that's one potential invasion that they were able to avoid. And so, working with our programs and figuring out where the gaps are on their end, figuring out where their funding comes short and how we can better assist them is something that we're going to be working on moving forward. And how can FOBLOP help? Well, you're doing this. This is exactly what we like. We like to have a voice. Again, prevention, education, outreach, that's how we do this most cost effectively. That's how we stop these new invasions. And so hosting these sorts of things is great. Getting the word out to your partners with the Lake Association, your municipalities, letting them know what the risks of an aquatic invasive species are and how we can stop it is how you can help us. And we appreciate all the help that we've gotten over the years. I know you guys have done great work with our program. So that's all I had. I just wanted to thank you all. I'll put my name and email and a link to the website in the chat, but I just wanted to stop and thank FOBLOP for hosting this event and thank everyone for showing up.
Okay, Olin.
Yes.
We have some questions in the chat. This is Martha Winston.
Great.
And so I'm going to go through these. Some are repetitious, so if I don't read your exact chat, it's because I think it's been covered by Olin already.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, the recording and the slides from this presentation will be available on the FOBLOP website following the presentation. So that answers a lot of questions about people listening to it again or pulling slides off for their own use. Then another question, has DEC printed more of the clean and dry handouts? And if so, can lake associations get some for boaters, lake renters, and residents?
Absolutely. I have a box of like 10,000 of them. Please take them off my hands. They don't do any good sitting in a warehouse. But if you need them or you want them, mailing's kind of a problem for us with now telework. Mailing has become a whole thing within the DEC. But I'll get them out there. We want them out in the open. We are trying to get our manuals, our taxonomic keys and signs printed right now. That's something we're working on. And again, if you have requests, I'm going to be putting on our website a request form for all of our greeter programs. And so, if you have a greeter program, work with them to get new signage, new pamphlets, that sort of thing as well. But yeah, feel free to send me an email. Let me know what you want. I'm happy to work with you all. It might take me a while to get out there, but I'm happy to work with you and get them to you.
Okay. Another question. Why don't we see the greeter data from Lake Champlain greeters? Why is that separate?
Sure. It's because they use WISP data, which comes from New York, and so they kind of do the New York side of things. We just haven't historically kind of interconnected the DEC and Lake Champlain, and that's something that we're working on changing. And so that's something I really want to work on, and I really want to be able to work with Lake Champlain's data because they have a ton of great data. It is kind of hard. Again, they work in both New York, Quebec, and Vermont, so some of the data is international and isn't super relevant to us, but I do want to see how that data is moving around. And again, we're now starting to work a bit more with our Quebec partners just across the border, especially in Memphremagog area and Missisquoi Bay. And so those are things that we're working on improving.
Okay, great. Beth from Lake Seymour asks, can we get lake-specific data from Survey 123 about what water bodies and watercraft and where they came from most It'd also be helpful to determine which days and times are busiest so we could triage our hours. So we're covering the busiest hours because decrease in funding.
Yes, absolutely. So our Eco AmeriCorps member, who I think is on this call, Leah, they just put together a phenomenal dashboard manual on how to use the dashboard and how to download your data. And so all of your, you can filter within that dashboard, you can filter to lake specific data, and then you can also filter it to a certain time frame. So if you only want to look at a week, or if you want to look at just a summer, you can do that. And then you can download all of that raw data to your computer. And so that's how I got all of these graphs. I downloaded all of that data to my computer from the dashboard, and you're welcome to do that. We're hoping to finalize the manual sometime next week. Hopefully we'll get it up on our website, how to really use it. That data will have timestamps, it will have what was found, it will have where the boats are coming from, it'll have when they were last used, all of the questions that are asked in survey 1, 2, 3 it will cover. So that's definitely something that we have available.
Okay, thank you. But you'll also need to have the password, right? You'll have to be survey 1, 2, 3 password to get onto that.
Correct. So to get onto that, and that's something that if we just changed our username and password from last year. So you can reach out to me. I can send you the new username and password if you're associated with a greeter program. Otherwise, if you just need the password, but you're not associated with a greeter program, if you want the data, you can send me an email and I'm happy to send it over to you. That's not a problem. Again, working on getting this all kind of out in the public and just on our website, so it's readily available is my long-term goal for the program. So that's something we're doing.
Great. And Tracy asks, will wake boats be included in the new greeter form along with training for decontamination?
Yep. Yeah. So I just had a conversation with Kim about that yesterday, actually. We had questions about that in our greeter training. Yes, we're trying to cover, I'm going to now start covering wake boats more, especially now that we have, this rule-making group that's going through. And so we will have wake boat specific procedures. I'm putting it in our greeter manual now. So we're finalizing that. And so, yes, we're hoping to cover kind of all things wake boats, since I know that's a big concern for a lot of our partners.
Okay, great. Cheryl from Lake Elmore says, should we be asking our greeters to inspect boats both on launch and on retrieval, since retrieval seems important from your graphs?
Yes, yeah. So that's something that we do ask, is that boats are inspected on both launch and retrieval. Like you said, from my graphs, it's showing that we're getting a lot coming out of lakes, especially with Elmore having irregular milfoil. That's something we really want to make sure is no boats leaving the body of water have anything on them, so they can't be moved to another body of water.
Okay. And then there's a question from Chrissy on Shadow about the spider maps, the maps you were talking about that interconnect the lakes, boat traffic, spider maps to show which way the points are where the boats are coming from. And you said those will be updated this year?
Trying to, yeah, that one's, I know that they're well loved. And so I'm working on a way to make them a little clearer. I'm not a huge fan of all of the ways that they were implemented. And so I really want to make them have as much information as possible without being overwhelming. And so, yes, they will be, I'm working on it. I'm working with Kim on how to best implement that. And so I'm hoping to get them posted sooner rather than later. And we should have one from 2022 soon. Okay.
I know we're running out of time, but I do want to note that Beth put up a key. If you want an online field guide to invasive species, she put up a link for you to go to the greeter site that has a really good key for identifying invasives. That's in the chat today. And then is there an effort to integrate the Champlain Basin program data to better understand the transport of invasives to and from Champlain?
Yeah, so like I said, that's something I'm working on doing. We want to increase kind of our interconnectivity with the Champlain Basin program. So that's something that a long-term effort is definitely in the works.
Okay. I think we're out of time. So I think the rest of it has pretty much been covered. Thank you, Olin. It was really great. And I'm going to give it back to Jack.
Yeah, thanks, Olin, very much. One thing I want to ask Dave Johnson to talk about is there's going to be a questionnaire that's going to pop up. So Dave, could you unmute yourself and just inform our audience today how much we would appreciate their input on this very short questionnaire? Dave?
Yes, so when you close out the meeting, you should be directed in your browser to a 4-question survey, which will just take you a minute or two to fill in. And this provides FOVLAP with a lot of good information that our committee has been using over the years to schedule events like this. So I encourage you to give us your input.
And that will pop up automatically. Dave?
Yes, it should.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank Olin. Your enthusiasm is amazing. We're so glad to have you as running the greeter program. You know, Kim did a great job, but it's just, there's so much to do, and it's good to have an extra set of hands and some fresh eyes. And I think we're all stunned and with you. And I think our audience knows, and I hope you leave us your contact information to contact you for many questions. The last thing I'd like to say in closing is I'd like to thank the audience for your questions and your participation. We're really trying our very best to have these noontime 1-hour sessions, something that's important to you, something that you can use, and something that you can take with you. So your feedback on the questionnaire and other things is really critical. And we'd also welcome you to become a member of our committee and think about FOVLAB committees. We need volunteers. I hope you've appreciated as much as I have what FOVLAB's been trying to do in the last few years with expanding our presence on the web, with dealing with issues and getting information out. And we really have a great desire. And so we hope you'll reach out to us and become one of us. So thanks very much. So Jackie, any last minute comments before closing?
Just thank everyone for joining us. Olin, this was phenomenal. Thank you so much for sharing this. It was great to hear the questions and how your slide presentation, I'm sure, will be used by many. So thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks.
Olin.
And my contact information is in the chat, just so you know, it's there. So feel free to
Okay.
reach out by email or call. I'm happy to always talk.
All right. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.